You are a Serbian volunteer in Belgrade during the Great War. The White City is being attacked, and you can't help but wonder what the fate of your people will be. A fellow soldier silently walks to a flower shop and puts a flower on his coat. And then many more follow, adorning their clothes and guns with flowers. You take a good look at them, a whole army of policemen, volunteers and soldiers, regular human beings, bearing flowers. But soon they'll learn their place in history as heroes. Serbia, oh beautiful Serbia, the nation whose conflict with the Austro-Hungarian Empire ignited the series of declarations of war that gave birth to what we know as the Great War, and proceeded to fight a full-blown empire. But how did all of this come to be? Well, allow me to tell you. Hey ops, my name is Jan, I almost forgot to say that. A few years before Christ, the land that is now Serbia was reached by civilization by a not very well known nation called the Roman Empire, having two important cities founded there. The Great Sirmium, one of the largest Roman cities in the present-day region of Sirmia, and Singidunum, the present-day Belgrade. And this land gave birth to the first Christian emperor, Constantine the Great. In the 6th century, it was populated by Slavic tribes, one of them being referred to as the Serbs. When it consolidated itself as Serbia, it became a principality of the Byzantine Empire, but was eventually granted independence. In the 9th century, Byzantium offered them an alphabet and to convert to Christianity through priests, which they embraced. After making ties with the Franks and Hungarians and repeatedly fighting with the medieval Bulgaria until the 13th century, the Serbian Empire was born, achieving its peak in 1346, after beating the hell out of Byzantium and conquering a fair share of its territories, dominating from Belgrade to most of Greece. It started breaking until 1389, the Battle of Kosovo against the Ottoman Empire, which wanted to conquer the Balkans. But Serbia was not fully conquered until 7 decades later, when Smederevo fell in 1459, having the Balkans disputed between Ottoman and Habsburg imperial domination for centuries. But that was only until 1815, after 11 violent years of revolution against the Ottomans. Serbia was given the status of principality, with Prince Miloš Obrenović at the head, becoming the second European country to abolish slavery and feudalism. On the 15th of February of 1835, the first Serbian constitution was adopted, one of the first in Europe to establish a fully fledged democracy, an equality of citizens regardless of ethnicity or religion. And yeah, they did end up kicking Ottoman imperial rule out of there in 1867 and becoming a kingdom in 1882. In 1912, the Balkan League, composing of Greece, Serbia, Montenegro and Bulgaria, fought the First Balkan War against the Ottomans, successfully taking the Balkans in a matter of 8 months in May of 1913. Just 1 month later, after the promised terrain to Bulgaria wasn't given, the Balkans made an alliance against Bulgaria, who answered by attacking them. But the mighty Bulgaria was unable to take all of them at once, and the Second Balkan War lasted 5 weeks until August. And before Serbia had 10 months to resupply from war expenses, the 28th of June of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand got shot. The responsible in question was Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian 19-year-old with separatist and nationalist ideas since early age, and targeted a potential Austro-Hungarian heir because he was the most proximal enforcer of the conquering of Bosnia. After declaring his intentions of assassinating the Archduke, the Serbian secret organization Black Hand handed him weapons and resources. When the carriage of Ferdinand took a wrong turn, it coincidentally drove close to Gavrilo, who immediately shot the Archduke and his wife. Upon discovering the involvement of the Black Hand, another empire wanted beef with Serbia, sending an ultimatum with 10 requests that was intended to be rejected. And to the surprise of all of Europe, Serbia, under the rule of King Petar I, accepted all of their requests in exchange of peace, apart from the point which implied Austro-Hungarian officers stepping into Serbia to investigate the involvement of the Black Hand. But they offered the alternative of having international officers doing the investigation. But although all of the big nations, including the German Empire, said fair enough to that response, Austro-Hungary declared war on Serbia the 28th of July, disregarding the answer, partially motivated by xenophobia and by thinking that the Serbian democracy was better off under their rule than being independent. Afraid of losing their only Slavic allies in the Balkans, the Russian Empire declared war to the Central Powers, which France had to do as well due to their alliance, making Serbia a member of the Entente, the now called Allies. And then, every single Serbian man, woman and child was severely affected by the actions of a few. Belgrade was already located in the northern border of Serbia, and the 29th of July it was shelled by ships and artillery as civilians were evacuated from the city, marking the beginning of the Great War. Under the command of Oskar Potiorek, Austro-Hungary invaded from the north and west by the end of July, starting what they called a quick punishment of Serbia, a kingdom that had inferior armament. In the meantime, led by Field Marshal Radomir Putnik, the Serbs got ready, destroying all of the Sava and Danube bridges to slow the enemy down. They used their time excellently, defending the rivers and establishing posts in the most convenient placements. The 15th of August, as the enemy marched from the west, the general of the Second Army, Stepa Stepanovic, who realized that the enemy was struggling to move through the Serbian environment, proposed occupying Mount Se, where his army joined the first one, expecting the attackers to step closer. And unfortunately, for the invaders that is, they did, starting the first major clash of the war, the Battle of Se. A 4-day-long fight in which the Serbs violently pushed the enemy back, making them retreat in panic, having many of them drowning in the river, leading to the liberation of the occupied town of Šabac on the 24th, fully defeating the first attempt at invading Serbia, making it the first Allied victory of World War I, directly sending a message to the Empire: Serbia won't back down. Requested by their allies, Serbia was pressured to take the offensive into the region of Sirmia, immediately progressing. But the 7th of September, Potiorek decided to invade once again, to force the Serbians to come back to defense mode, starting the Battle of the Drina. The invading Serbs were ordered to come back, against very strong opposition from them, who really felt like marching all the way to Vienna. They retreated to the surrounding hills, starting a month-and-a-half long trench battle, only halting the enemy invasion. Apart from the Serbians' use of mine warfare, digging under the enemy's front trench, planting mines and detonating them right before a great infantry charge. The 5th of November, the third attempt at conquering Serbia started, leading to the Battle of Kolubara, in which Serbia ran out of artillery ammunition. The 29th of November, the defenders were ordered to temporarily retreat from Belgrade to regroup. The enemy took the city and celebrated a little bit too early, aiming to raise morale, but just a few days later, Allied supplies of ammunition arrived and Serbian morale skyrocketed. Marshal Putnik was very confident that the enemy troops must have been severely overworked at this point, and the 3rd of December, the full Serbian army charged back to the capital. The enemy rushed a flanking strategy, expecting the Serbs to run away, but instead they overwhelmed and forced the flanking forces to retreat, And then Potiorek started losing his mind, and eventually he had no choice but to order a full retreat. The Serbs came back home the 15th of December, making the 1914 Serbian campaign into a disaster. Austro-Hungarians suffered heavier casualties than the smaller enemy force, amounting to 215,000 against 170,000, and Potiorek was removed from command. While Serbia strengthened its defenses in September of 1915, the importance of attempting to conquer Serbia for the fourth time was argued, since it will allow for better transportation and communication between Austro-Hungary and their Ottoman allies, who had been recently defeated with no support. And Bulgaria was convinced of entering the war on the side of the Central Powers. And the forces deemed necessary to defeat the Serbs were the German 11th Army, with support in Alpenkorps, the Austro-Hungarian 3rd Army, and the Bulgarian 1st Army, a combined force of almost 1 million troops, against 260,000 Serbians and 40,000 Montenegrins. And you might be wondering who was taking Potiorek's place. Well, it will be one of the greatest German generals of all time, August von Mackensen, the so-called Last Hussar. Between the 5th and 7th of October, the invaders started their attack from multiple river borders, forcing the Serbs to spread behind river defenses, using camouflage machine guns and cannons, destroying enemy improvised bridges and artillery, and making the best out of the terrain. And on the 7th, the Central Powers stepped in Belgrade, suffering heavy counterattacks from infantry. Austrian troops took the ancient Singidunum fortress of Kalemegdan, but before they could get reinforcements, hundreds of Serbians, police officers, Serbian volunteers, and the 10th Infantry Regiment, under the command of Major Dragutin Gavrilovic, were fixing their bayonets and getting ready to fight a much larger force. Their objective was to make time for the civilian evacuation to be completed. And it was then that Dragutin made the speech that ingrained him into history. A speech that, well, I just have to say it myself. Soldiers, exactly at 3 o'clock, the enemy is to be crushed by your first charge, destroyed by your grenades and bayonets. The honor of Belgrade, our capital, must not be stained. Soldiers, heroes, the Supreme Command has erased our regiment from its records. Our regiment has been sacrificed for the honor of Belgrade and the fatherland, so you no longer need to worry about your lives. They no longer exist. So forward to glory, for the king and the fatherland. Long live the king, long live Belgrade. Many of them took flowers from a small shop and put them on their coats and rifles, before what they knew was, most certainly, their death. They desperately charged towards the bridgehead, initially making good progress, but reached by the firing of enemy ships and continuously shot, stopping most of the charging force. Dragutin was wounded and dragged out by some of the survivors, for he was deemed too useful to be lost. On the 8th of October, the Serbians retreated Belgrade to regroup in the south. The invaders lost 10,000 men due to the first defense of Belgrade, which earned unconditional admiration by them, and von Mackensen personally ordered a monument to be built in the former battleground, which still stands to this day, with the words, "Here rest Serbian heroes." Expecting Allied reinforcements that never came, which were intercepted by the Bulgarians in Greece, for 5 weeks the Serbians continued to fight against Germanics and Bulgarians on 2 fronts, outnumbered as usual, evacuating various villages which will later be taken and burned. Both the Serbians and Bulgarians will fight with limitless brutality, even punching and throwing boulders when they ran out of ammunition. The 25th of November, a full retreat from Serbia to replenish was ordered. The Montenegrins didn't join them, but rather defended their kingdom from Austrian invasion, being defeated in 2 weeks. And the so-called Great Retreat of 400,000 soldiers and civilians took place. Side by side with their king, Petar I, they marched through Montenegro and Albania during a harsh winter, suffering heavy losses on the way to the island of Corfu, partially due to the cold and starvation, but also due to Austrian aerial bombardments, marking the first aerial bombardments of civilians in history. In spring of 1916, only 120,000 soldiers and 60,000 civilians reached Corfu, plenty of them in a frail state. As the Allies helped them replenish, the Serbs started getting ready to fight again. And in 1916, when Greece declared war on the Central Powers, on the Salonika front, the now Serbian Legion joined the Allies, preventing Bulgarian advance in trench warfare. And in September of 1918, they were the largest force executing the successful Vardar offensive, knocking Bulgaria out of the war and heavily weakening Austro-Hungary, one of the key victories of the Great War, which finally made the German Empire think that the balance was against them, leading to the end of the gruesome war. Serbia fought from the very start and to the very end, essentially winning the Great War. After the end, the remaining Serbians finally came back home, binding their kingdom with former Austrian Slavic territories, being Slovenia and Croatia, and their Montenegrin brothers, and taking the lead of the new Kingdom of Yugoslavia, with Belgrade as the capital and with Peter I at the head, who's remembered as King Petar the Liberator. The Serbian losses were around 1 million of 4.5 million people, which represented about 25% in general, and 60% of their entire male population, being the most affected country in the whole war in perspective. The amount of executions, physical and sexual abuse, and war crimes against the Serbian people to discourage them from ever returning to their land was blatantly inhuman. The Serbian people were punished for making no other sin than to refuse to stay down and give up against an invading force that partially saw them as inferior. In a telegram to the Bulgarian Tsar, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II stated that it was disgraceful that 62,000 Serbians decided the war. There are many movies about the Serbian struggle during the Great War, like March on the Drina from 1964, Besa from 2009, King Petar I from 2018, and the documentary Heroi 1914. In 2016, the Swedish band Sabaton released a song inspired by the speech of Gavrilović, Last Dying Breath, which they performed in a concert in Belgrade. Before performing it, the speech, recorded by a famous Serbian actor, was played, being shouted along by a fair amount of the crowd, who knew the words by memory. Part Sundström, the bassist, said that the crowd's reaction moved the band to tears before playing the song. And from the many songs about the Serbian campaign, my favorite is March to Drina.